I saw my son, David, beam at her, completely captivated. Her name was Tiffany, and she was radiant in a dress that cost more than my first car. But it wasn't her beauty that held my attention. It was the cruel little smirk she shot my way as her friends tittered, their professionally whitened teeth flashing under the chandeliers. She leaned in, her voice just loud enough to carry, "Look at her," she said, nodding in my direction. "David's mother. I swear she must have found that dress in a church donation bin. Who even wears beige linen anymore? Poor, ragged old woman." Her friends, a flock of perfectly manicured magpies, giggled in unison. The sound was high and brittle. My dress wasn't ragged. It was simple, yes. It was a boat neck, 3/4 sleeve dress I had made myself from a bolt of Belgian linen I'd treasured for years. It was comfortable, and I thought, in my quiet way, it was elegant. I had sewn every seam, finished every hem with the precision born of 50 years at a sewing machine. To me, it was a piece of my heart. To her, it was a social crime. The shame was a hot flush that crawled up my neck. I just stood there, clutching my glass, feeling every one of my 68 years. I had raised David on my own after my husband, his father, passed away from a sudden heart attack when David was just 12. I'd worked my fingers to the bone to give him everything. And this was my reward, to be publicly shamed at his wedding by the woman he had chosen to marry, the woman he clearly adored more than anything. I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the bitterness of it. But I wasn't just some poor, ragged woman. They had no idea who I really was. And by the time I was done, they would. They would regret this day for the rest of their lives. Quick pause, subscribe, hit like, and drop your city in the comments so I can say hi next time. The wedding had been a production from the start. Tiffany came from what she called new money, which, as far as I could tell, meant her father owned a string of car dealerships across northern Florida. The wedding venue was a sprawling country club in Ocala, with manicured golf greens that rolled into the horizon, and an army of staff that seemed to glide instead of walk. My son David, a sweet but easily influenced boy who now worked as a marketing executive for his father-in-law, was swept up in the glamour of it all. "It's what Tiffany wants, Mom," he'd said to me over the phone weeks earlier, his voice defensive when I'd questioned the astronomical budget. "This is her big day. We can't cut corners." I hadn't argued. I sent them a generous check for $5,000, a significant sum for me, or so they thought, and enclosed a card with my heartfelt blessings. I received a thank you text from David 2 days later. "Thanks for the gift, Mom. Tiff says it'll cover the floral arrangements for the cocktail hour." The casual dismissal stung. For weeks, every conversation with David had been a minefield of Tiffany's demands. They needed a bigger deposit for the photographer, they had to upgrade the champagne, Tiffany's dress needed a second round of custom alterations. The implication was always there, hanging in the air between us, that I, with my modest, paid-off ranch house in a quiet neighborhood in Gainesville, and my ancient but reliable Buick, was somehow failing to contribute enough to their grand spectacle. Now, standing in the ballroom, I watched as Tiffany's mother, Margaret, made her way toward me. Margaret was a woman sculpted by ambition and good lighting. She was thin and severe, dressed in a tight sapphire blue gown that screamed its designer label. Her face was a smooth, unreadable mask. I braced myself for another wave of condescension, perhaps a polite but firm suggestion that I mingle with the other relatives seated by the kitchen doors. She stopped in front of me, her eyes doing a slow, methodical scan of my simple linen dress, my silver hair pinned in a neat chignon, and the single strand of pearls, my late husband's wedding gift to me, at my throat. Her perfectly arched eyebrows drew together in a faint, puzzled line. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not pity, but confusion. A dawning, disbelieving recognition. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was a low, cautious whisper, completely at odds with the noisy ballroom. "Excuse me," she began, her gaze fixed on the subtle, hand-stitched detailing at my neckline. This is going to sound very strange, but aren't you, by any chance, are you Estelle? The name was a ghost from another life, a name no one in my personal world ever used. Estelle was the name on the discreet, embossed label sewn into the bespoke gowns and suits that left my private workshop. It was the name whispered by socialites in Palm Beach and politicians' wives in Washington. It was the name of my business, Estelle Designs, a name that had never once been advertised, but was spoken of with reverence by those in the know. It was my professional identity, one I had carefully firewalled from my quiet life as Carol Peterson. I let a small, tight smile touch my lips. "I don't know who you mean," I said softly, turning to place my empty glass on a passing waiter's tray. Inside, my heart was hammering. The game, I realized, had just begun. Margaret knew. And that single piece of knowledge was a weapon I hadn't realized I possessed until that very moment. The tide was about to turn. The week after the wedding, David and Tiffany returned from their honeymoon in Bora Bora. Their Instagram stories were a dizzying parade of overwater bungalows, infinity pools, and drone shots of them kissing on a white sand beach. The day after they got back, my phone rang. It was David. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice bright but a little too forced. "We're back. It was amazing. Tiff sends her love." I doubted that very much, but I murmured the appropriate pleasantries. Then came the real reason for his call. "So, listen, Tiff and I have been talking. We're a little worried about you, rattling around in that big old house by yourself." My house wasn't big. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath brick ranch I'd shared with my husband for 30 years. It held every memory I treasured. My quilting room with its bolts of fabric and tidy rows of thread was my sanctuary. My garden, filled with hydrangeas and gardenias, was my pride and joy. It wasn't a big old house. It was my home. "I'm perfectly fine, David," I said calmly. "The house is no trouble at all. But Mom, the upkeep, the lawn, the roof. What if something happens? You could have a fall. We think it's time you consider downsizing. We found this adorable little condo complex over by the university. Secure, no maintenance. You'd love it." I could picture it already. A sterile beige box with no room for my sewing machines and no patch of dirt for my flowers. "I'm not moving, David." There was a frustrated sigh on his end of the line. "Mom, just think about it. If you sell the house, you'd have a nice nest egg. You could travel. You wouldn't have to worry about money." The implication was clear. He thought I was poor, that my life was a constant struggle. It was an image he and Tiffany had crafted to suit their own narrative. A narrative that ended with them getting their hands on the equity from my property. The calls became a daily occurrence. Sometimes it was David, cajoling and reasoning. Other times it was Tiffany, her voice syrupy sweet and condescending. "Carol, we just want what's best for you. Imagine how free you'll feel without that big mortgage hanging over your head." I owned my home outright for 15 years. She knew that. I'd told David countless times. It was a deliberate, twisting poke designed to make me feel old, incompetent, and financially insecure. One Tuesday morning, I was sorting through a box of receipts in my office, a small, sunlit room off the kitchen, when I noticed a letter on the hall table I'd overlooked in the previous day's mail. It was from our local bank, a community bank I'd used for 40 years. The envelope was thicker than a standard statement. My fingers, a little stiff from a morning spent pinning a delicate silk charmeuse lining, fumbled with the flap. Inside was a sheaf of papers. The header read, "Home Equity Line of Credit Application, Preliminary Approval." My blood ran cold. The loan amount was for $150,000. The applicant name was mine, Carol Peterson. The signature on the bottom line was a near-perfect forgery of my own. I sank into the chair by the phone. the papers trembling in my hand. Someone was trying to borrow money against my home, my paid-for, secure for the rest of my life home. And I had a sickening feeling I knew exactly who it was. They thought I was a poor, ragged woman, an easy mark. They thought I would be too confused or too frail to notice. They were wrong. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was a declaration of war. My quiet life was being invaded, and my instinct for survival, honed by years of building a business from nothing, kicked in. The quilter, the gardener, the quiet widow was gone. In her place was Estelle, and Estelle did not lose. Stay till the end, I'll show the truth. My first move was to call the bank, not the local branch, but the fraud department number listed at the bottom of the letter. I spoke to a woman named Patricia, her voice calm and professional. I explained the situation. I had not applied for an HELC. The signature was not mine. "Okay, Mrs. Peterson," Patricia said, "I'm freezing the application immediately. According to our records, the application was submitted online last Tuesday with scanned documents. We will, of course, need you to come in and sign an affidavit." "I'll be there in an hour," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "One more thing, ma'am," she added before I could hang up. "The application lists a co-signer who was present for the initial document verification at our Millhopper branch, your son, David Peterson." The breath left my lungs in a painful rush. So it was true. He hadn't just forged my name. He'd walked into a bank and actively participated in the fraud. The sweet boy I'd raised, who I'd taught to ride a bike and bait a fishing hook, was trying to steal from me. The betrayal was a physical ache in my chest. After my visit to the bank, where I signed the affidavit and gave Patricia a sample of my real signature, I drove home in a daze. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. The bank documents required a notary stamp to verify my signature on the initial forms. The name on the notary seal was one I didn't recognize. Cynthia Bell. A quick search online revealed that she was a mobile notary who worked primarily in the Ocala area, where Tiffany and her family lived. It also revealed a photo of her on social media, arm in arm with Tiffany at what looked like a bridal luncheon. They were friends. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment bad decision from David. This was a planned conspiracy. Tiffany and her notary friend had helped him. A cold, hard anger began to replace the hurt. They thought they were clever. But professionals, whether they're fashion designers or criminals, always leave a trail. My next stop was my home office. I pulled out my financial records. Not the simple checkbook David thought I lived by, but the meticulous business ledgers for Estelle Designs. My real income, my real assets. Then I went to my calendar and my credit card statements for last Tuesday, the day the documents were supposedly signed and notarized in my presence. It was right there in black and white. Tuesday, October 17th. My calendar, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., quilting circle at Agnes's house. My visa statement, 10:15 a.m., Starbucks, Archer Road, Gainesville, $4.75. 12:45 p.m., Joanne Fabrics, Butler Plaza, Gainesville, $82.14. I had been in Gainesville all day, an hour-and-a-half drive from the bank branch in Millhopper where the document verification supposedly took place. I had a dozen witnesses at my quilting circle, elderly women who would remember me being there because I had brought the lemon pound cake. I had receipts with timestamps. I had irrefutable proof that I could not have signed that document. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Tiffany. It was a photo of a brand new, obscenely large white SUV with a giant red bow on the hood. The caption read, "David surprised me with an early anniversary present. Isn't he the best husband ever?" The price tag on a car like that was easily north of $80,000. Money they didn't have. Money they were planning on stealing from me. I set the phone down on the polished oak of my dining room table. The fury in my chest was now a glacial calm. They weren't just careless. They were arrogant.
They were so convinced of my weakness, of my dotage, that they didn't even bother to cover their tracks. They were spending the money before they even had it. I needed more than just bank records and an alibi. I needed to understand the full scope of their plan. I decided to play their game. The next morning, I called David. "David, darling," I said, pitching my voice to sound a little frail, a little flustered. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the house. Maybe you're right. It is a lot for me to handle." I could almost hear the triumphant grin on the other end of the line. "Mom, that's great. I'm so glad you're being sensible about this. Tiffany will be thrilled." "Well, I'm not making any promises," I hedged, "but I'm willing to talk about it. Could you and Tiffany come over for dinner on Saturday? We can discuss the options." "Of course, Mom, we'll be there. We'll even bring dessert," he said, the picture of a loving, dutiful son. The trap was set. For the next 3 days, I prepared. This wasn't about a dinner party. It was about staging a theater of war. I contacted my lawyer, a sharp woman named Sarah who had handled the incorporation of my business years ago. I updated my will, creating a new version that named the local university's textile arts program as my sole beneficiary, with the provision that my estate be used for scholarships. I had my original will on hand to compare. I installed a small voice-activated recorder in the ceramic plant pot on my dining room sideboard. Florida is a two-party consent state for recording, so I knew I would have to inform them. That in itself would be part of the plan. I pulled together a file. The bank letter, my credit card statements, a list of names from my quilting circle. I even drove to Agnes's house and got a copy of a photo she'd taken that Tuesday. Me, holding my quilting block, a smile on my face, a clock on the wall behind me clearly reading 11:30 a.m. The final piece was Margaret, Tiffany's mother, the woman who knew my secret. I wrestled whether to involve her. Her complicity was unknown, but her knowledge was a wild card. On Friday afternoon, I found the number for her husband's main car dealership and asked to be put through to her husband's office. From there, I got his private assistant to give me her number under the guise of being a wedding vendor. I called her. She answered on the second ring, her voice clipped and professional. "Margaret, this is Carol Peterson, David's mother." There was a moment of silence. "Oh, Carl. Hello. What can I do for you?" The warmth from the wedding reception was gone. "I am having dinner with David and Tiffany tomorrow night to discuss some important family matters," I said, keeping my tone level. "It believes it would be in your best interest to be here as well." "My best interest?" she asked, a note of suspicion in her voice. "What sort of matters?" I paused, letting the silence stretch. I said, "Matters that concern the name Estelle." The silence on the other end was profound. I heard a faint, sharp intake of breath. When she finally spoke, her voice was a strangled whisper. "What time?" I said, 7 o'clock, and hung up the phone. All the pieces were now in place. That Saturday, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my lawn, I took a cast iron skillet out of my cupboard. I decided to make my late husband's favorite meal, pan-seared chicken with rosemary and lemon, with roasted potatoes. There was something calming about the familiar ritual. The sizzle of the chicken hitting the hot oil, the fragrant aroma filling my kitchen. It was the meal of a happy home, a home I was about to fight for. Tonight, they wouldn't find a poor, ragged woman. They would find a woman defending her life's work, her legacy, and her peace of mind. And I would show them no mercy. Keep watching. There will be justice.
At 6:50, a sleek, white SUV I recognized from Tiffany's text pulled into my driveway. David got out first, wearing a pink polo shirt and a strained smile. Tiffany followed, emerging like a butterfly from a chrysalis. She was wearing a tight floral dress and carried a bakery box tied with a satin ribbon. They walked up the path, their expressions a careful blend of concern and eagerness. They looked like vultures circling a sick animal. I opened the door before they could ring the bell.
"Hello, darlings," I said, with a warm smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Come in, you're just in time." "Hi, Mom," David said, kissing my cheek. It felt cold. "Something smells delicious." "We brought a Keimlein pie from that little French bakery you love," Tiffany chirped, thrusting the box at me. "An offering. A bribe." "How thoughtful," I said, placing it on the kitchen counter. "Dinner's almost ready. Why don't you two have a seat in the dining room?" They settled themselves at the polished oak table, the one where David had done his homework every night for years. They looked around the room, their eyes lingering on the comfortable but dated furniture, the framed family photos, the collection of ceramic birds on the mantelpiece. I could see the calculation in Tiffany's gaze as she mentally cataloged every item, likely estimating its value for an estate sale. At precisely 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang again. David frowned. "Are you expecting someone else, Mom?" "Just one more," I said cheerfully, wiping my hands on my apron as I went to the door. I opened it to find Margaret standing on my porch. She looked nervous. Her usual severe confidence had been replaced by a tense uncertainty. She clutched her expensive leather handbag like a shield. "Margaret!" I exclaimed, with feigned surprise. "What a coincidence! Please come in and join us." Tiffany's jaw slacked. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Margaret avoided her daughter's eyes, her gaze fixed on me. "Carol invited me." "Well, the more the merrier," I said, guiding her to the dining room. I took my seat at the head of the table. David and Tiffany exchanged a confused, anxious look. The pleasant, domestic atmosphere I had curated was now thick with unspoken questions. The performance was about to begin. I served the chicken. The conversation was stilted, full of meaningless chatter about the weather and the local news. Tiffany made a half-hearted attempt at complimenting my cooking, while David nervously shredded his napkin in his lap. Margaret just pushed a potato around her plate with her fork, her eyes darting between me and her daughter. Finally, after I cleared the plates, I sat back down and folded my hands on the table. "Well," I began, my voice clear and calm, "I believe we have some business to discuss." David straightened up, pasting on his serious, man-of-the-family expression. "Right, Mom, about the house?" "Before we start," I interrupted gently, "I need to let you all know that for legal clarity, I am recording this conversation." I gestured toward the planter on the sideboard. "Do I have everyone's consent to continue?" The change in the room was instantaneous. The pretense of a family dinner evaporated, replaced by a cold, stark tension. Tiffany's eyes widened, a flicker of panic in them. David swallowed hard. "Recording? Mom, what is this? Why would you need to do that?" "Because," I said, my voice hardening just enough to let them know the game was over, "I am about to discuss a criminal conspiracy to commit bank fraud against me, perpetrated by my own son and his wife." I reached for the file I had placed on the chair beside me. I pulled out the first document and slid it across the table toward David. It was the copy of the HELOC application. "Perhaps you can explain your signature on this, David, as a co-signer to a loan I never applied for." The color drained from his face. He stared at the paper as if it were a snake. Tiffany snatched it from him, her eyes scanning the page. We were just trying to help, Carol. We were worried you weren't managing. We were going to use the money to fix up the house so it would sell for a better price. We were going to give you all the profit." "By forging my signature?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. by using your good friend Cynthia Bell, the notary, to falsify a legal document stating I was present when in fact I was an hour and a half away at my quilting circle? I slid the next piece of evidence across the table. The dated photograph of me and my friends, the clock visible on the wall. Then came the credit card receipts. The pile of evidence grew in the center of the table, a mountain of their lies. David finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, cornered fear. "Mom, I'm sorry," he whispered. "It was Tiffany's idea. She said it was for the best, that you wouldn't even notice." "Of course I'd notice. You think I'm a fool, an incompetent old woman you can just manipulate and steal from? You spent your entire life in this house, David. Did you learn nothing about me? Did you really think I wouldn't fight back?" Margaret, who had been silent and pale throughout the entire exchange, finally spoke. Her voice was shaking. She wasn't looking at her daughter or at David. She was looking at me, at the file, at the cold resolve in my face. "It's true, isn't it? You really are her. You are Estelle." Tiffany's head whipped around to face her mother. "Estelle? What are you talking about? Who is Estelle?" she demanded, her voice cracking with frustration and confusion. The name meant nothing to her. She just saw her well-laid plans crumbling into dust. She didn't see the final, devastating checkmate that was about to be laid on the board.
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video. Bye bye.